I was paying for a loaf of bread and a small birthday card at the neighborhood grocery store in Cleveland when the cashier's hand suddenly paused. He was an older man, late 50s maybe, with weathered lines that told of a life of hard work. His eyes, usually kind and distracted, suddenly sharpened. Before I could understand what was happening, he reached lightly for my wrist. "Ma'am," he whispered, leaning close, his voice just above a breath. "You need to keep an eye on your son, his wife's family. They're not what they claim to be." The words landed like a stone in my chest. For a second, I thought I'd misheard. I blinked at him, the card slipping in my hand, and asked him to repeat himself. But he simply scanned the rest of my items as if nothing had happened, his face once again neutral, almost indifferent. I stood frozen, my mind a storm. My son, Daniel, had always been the center of my world. After losing my husband decades ago, raising him had been both my challenge and my joy. To hear a stranger speak of him with such intensity, suggesting deception, betrayal, was unbearable. My first instinct was denial. Surely this was a mistake. Surely the cashier had confused us with someone else. The register spat out my receipt, and I reached for it with trembling hands. The thin strip of paper fluttered like a flag in the air conditioning draft, as unsteady as my breath. I forced a smile, thanked him faintly, and walked toward the doors. Outside, the parking lot was bright, the September sun bouncing off windshields. My son was waiting for me in the car, humming to himself, unaware of the bomb that had just been dropped into my mind. I stopped short. Do I tell him? Do I laugh it off? Or do I look for the truth myself? A rush of instinct told me what to do. I veered toward the side of the store, slipping behind the loading dock, my heart hammering. From here, I had a view of the entrance. If the cashier's words held even a grain of truth, I would see it unfold with my own eyes. That was the moment. I decided I would not confront. I would watch. The cashier's grip wasn't forceful, but it was firm enough to jolt me. His name tag read Harold, the kind of old-fashioned name you didn't hear much anymore. He leaned across the counter, his voice so low I almost mistook it for the hum of the conveyor belt. "Mrs. Ellis," he said, eyes darting to the people behind me. "I know your son, and I know his wife's family. You need to understand. They spend money like water while crying poor to him. They're using him. And you too." For a moment, I thought I was the one who had lost my mind. His words didn't match the quiet rustle of grocery bags around us, or the impatient tap of a teenager's sneaker in line behind me. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. "What? What did you say?" I stammered. But Harold's face had already shuddered. He scanned the last item, a greeting card, and tore the receipt loose as though he hadn't just shattered my reality. His eyes no longer met mine. If not for the faint pressure still lingering on my wrist, I might have believed I'd imagined it. I took the receipt with shaking fingers. My chest felt tight, my heart galloping as though I'd run a mile. I wanted to dismiss him as a nosy old man peddling gossip. People talk, especially in neighborhoods like ours where stories spread faster than smoke. But his urgency, the way his voice cracked as though he'd held this secret too long, stayed with me. My son Daniel had always been generous to a fault. And Marissa, his wife, came from a family that never hid their struggles. Franklin, her father, spoke often of unpaid bills, broken-down cars, and medical problems that seemed to multiply with the seasons. I had stretched my own thin budget to help more times than I could count. Was it all a lie? The thought made my stomach churn. I stepped aside to let the next customer through, clutching the small paper bag against my chest. The automatic doors slid open, and I was swallowed into the brightness of the afternoon. Cleveland's fall sun glared off the hoods of parked cars, And for a moment I just stood there, blinded, disoriented. Daniel's sedan was idling in a space a few rows down. I could see him through the windshield, drumming his fingers on the steering wheel, humming the way he always did when waiting for me. Innocent, unaware. How could I walk over there and tell him what I'd just heard? How could I shatter his peace with nothing more than a stranger's whisper? No, I couldn't. Not yet. I turned instead toward the side of the building. My shoes crunched over gravel as I slipped behind the loading dock. The air smelled faintly of cardboard and motor oil. From here, I had a clear angle on the front entrance, hidden from view. If Harold was right, I would see something. Maybe Franklin himself. Maybe a small detail that didn't add up. I needed more than words. I needed proof. I pressed my back against the cool brick wall, forcing myself to breathe slowly, to still the trembling in my hands. My receipt crackled like dry leaves as I folded it into my pocket. A lifetime of keeping my family together had taught me one thing. Sometimes, silence saw more than confrontation, so I waited. The air behind the loading dock was cooler, shaded from the harsh September sun. I adjusted my stance, careful not to make noise against the metal railing. From here, the front entrance of the grocery store was framed like a stage. Barely 2 minutes had passed when the doors slid open and out walked Franklin Price, my daughter-in-law's father. Froze. He was supposed to be a man on the brink of collapse. That's what Marissa had always said. A heart condition, fewer work hours, mounting medical bills. Every call carried some new crisis, and Daniel, sweet, loyal Daniel, always found a way to send help. I'd believed it all, but the man I saw now did not look broken. Franklin carried 2 glossy black shopping bags, the kind I recognized only from storefronts I'd never dared enter. Gold lettering shimmered across the side, bold and unmistakable. They weren't from this grocery store. They were from one of those high-end boutiques at the upscale mall, the kind of place where a single jacket could equal a month of my pension. He didn't carry them like burdens. He carried them like trophies. My throat tightened. Franklin strolled toward a row of cars, his step steady, his clothes pressed. I caught the gleam of his watch as the sun hit it, a metallic flash that looked more luxury than necessity. He stopped at a vehicle I almost didn't recognize. A sleek SUV, pale silver, polished to a mirror shine. This wasn't the sputtering old sedan they always mentioned when explaining why they couldn't get to work, why they needed help with repair. Bills! This was brand new, the kind of car that still smells of factory leather. He opened the trunk with a smooth click and placed the bags inside as if handling valuables. Then he pulled out his phone. I couldn't hear his words, but his body language told enough. Relaxed, confident. Not the posture of a man drowning in debt or waiting for surgery bills to be paid. I pressed back against the wall, the brick digging into my shoulders. My chest felt hot, my mind reeling. Harold's warning echoed louder now. They spend money like water, while crying poor. Still, disbelief clawed at me. Could Franklin have borrowed the car? Could the bags have been gifts? Some wild explanation. That didn't involve lies? But the memory of Marissa's trembling voice came back. Her tearful call just last week about how her father's car had finally died, how they had no transportation, how Daniel needed to send more money. Just this, once. And here was Franklin, sliding into a brand new SUV, engine purring like a contented cat. I wrapped my arms around myself, my receipt still folded like a secret in my pocket. Every instinct in me screamed that something was very wrong. Franklin glanced around the parking lot, his eyes sweeping with a sharpness that made me shrink back behind the railing. For a moment, I thought he'd seen me. He lingered there, scanning as if to make sure no one was watching. Suspicion curled in my stomach. Why check the lot so carefully if he had nothing to hide? After a long pause, he put his phone to his ear, again, leaned back in the driver's seat, and laughed. The sound carried faintly across the asphalt. Carefree. Pleased. The contradiction was unbearable. I gripped the railing, my knuckles white. My son had been working double shifts, sending money, wearing himself down with worry. And this man who claimed hunger and hardship, was shopping like royalty and cruising in a vehicle worth more than Daniel's yearly salary. Harold's whisper was no longer a rumor. It was a crack in the mask. And now that I'd seen it, I couldn't unsee it. I knew then that I was only at the edge of something bigger, and I wasn't ready to look away. As I crouched behind the loading dock, hidden from Franklin Price's polished world, my mind slid backward in time. I was 42 when I lost my husband. A heart attack, sudden and merciless, left me staring at an empty chair at the kitchen table and a stack of bills I had no idea how to manage. From that day forward, it was just Daniel and me. I worked 2 jobs for years. Clerical by day, diner waitress by night. My hands ached, my back stiffened, but I refused to let Daniel see the full weight I carried. He deserved more than pity. He deserved a chance, and in many ways, he gave me one too. His smile was my reward for long hours. His homework spread across. The kitchen counter was my measure of progress. When he finally graduated college, the first Ellis to do so, I wept harder than I had the day I buried his father. Now, at 67, my life is quieter, smaller. A modest pension from the county office pays my rent in a narrow Cleveland apartment with peeling paint and a view of the streetlights. Each month I ration my medications, cutting pills in half when the copay comes too high. I stretch groceries with casseroles and canned soups. I count coins not out of habit but out of necessity. And still, somehow, I've always found a way to send a little extra when Daniel needed help. Or when Marissa asked. Marissa, from the day Daniel brought her home, I wanted to believe she was good for him. She was pretty, polished, with a confidence that made me feel invisible in my own living room. But Daniel loved her, and that was enough. I kept my worries to myself. At first, she played the part of dutiful wife. She thanked me for gifts, included me in holidays, smiled at Daniel the way young wives should, but cracks began to show within. A year. She always spoke of her family's struggles, rent overdue, utilities cut, Franklin's health on the decline, a never-ending string of hardships. Her voice would tremble, eyes wet with tears, as she explained why Daniel needed to help, for now, just until things stabilized. I believed her. Or maybe I wanted to. Because what mother wants to accuse her son's wife of dishonesty? What mother wants to rock the fragile boat of her son's happiness? So I stayed silent, even when I noticed Marissa's manicures, the kind you don't get at discount salons. Even when she appeared at Sunday dinners in dresses that looked new, though she insisted they were consignment finds. Even when Franklin joked in passing about buying champagne on Daniel's dime and then laughed it off as humor, my gut stirred then. The same gut that had warned me years ago to check the locks twice at night, to trust when Daniel was sick even if he said he was fine, to push him toward college when he wanted to quit. But I silenced that voice. I told myself I was being paranoid, judgmental, unkind. And yet, as I watched Franklin slide into that gleaming SUV, my gut screamed. The truth I'd ignored. This wasn't misfortune. It was a pattern. The pieces clicked together. My penny-pinched life, my son's weary eyes after double shifts, Marissa's endless emergencies, and Franklin's leisurely wealth. For years, I had sacrificed quietly, believing I was keeping Daniel's marriage afloat. But maybe, just maybe, I had been feeding a lie, and if that lie had reached this far, how much deeper did it go? From my hiding place, The hum of the city dulled into background noise, and memories I'd buried began to resurface with painful clarity. Marissa had always been a master of timing. Her emergencies never arrived when Daniel and I were flush with extra money. No, they struck precisely when we were stretched thin. A late-night phone call just as Daniel's rent check cleared. A trembling voice the day before my medication refill was due. A desperate message when my water heater had broken, and I was scraping together coins for the repairman, and each time I opened my jar. That jar had become my safety net after my husband died. I kept it hidden in the kitchen cabinet behind a stack of old cookbooks. Every dollar tucked inside came from sacrifices, skipping a coffee at the bakery, passing up a winter coat in favor of patching the old one, cutting pills in half so the E.G. prescription would last longer. More than once, I had emptied it into Marissa's waiting hands. I can still see the day she stood at my door, face blotchy with supposed tears, clutching her phone. Franklin's tests came back. They're not sure if it's his heart. We don't have enough for the specialist, and I don't know what to do. Her words rushed out like water through a broken dam. I had reached for the jar without hesitation, pressing wrinkled bills into her palm, ignoring the gnawing ache in my chest. Her relief had been instant. Too instant, if I'm honest with myself now. She didn't ask twice if I was sure, didn't protest the way someone truly desperate might. She simply thanked me, pocketed the cash, and hurried away. Other moments were subtler, but no less unsettling. Like the time she arrived at Sunday dinner in a pair of shoes that looked like they cost more than my rent. "Oh, these?" she'd said when I commented. "A coworker gave them to me. Can you believe my luck?" Or the day I overheard her laughing on the phone saying, "Daniel always comes through. He's too good for his own good." She had noticed me in the doorway and quickly shifted the subject to groceries. I told myself I'd misheard. Even Franklin had slipped once. At a cookout, he clinked glasses with a neighbor and said, "Here's to Daniel, our family's secret sponsor." He chuckled, and when my eyes narrowed, he quickly waved it off as a joke. You know me, just kidding around. But the unease lingered. Piece by piece, the odd behaviors stacked like bricks in a wall I refused to see. Marissa's evasive answers when I asked about her job. Franklin's reluctance to show medical paperwork for his supposed condition. The endless stream of urgent bills that never seemed to end. Each incident alone could be explained away. Together, they painted a different picture. And deep down, my gut had whispered that something was off. I'd felt it twisting in me every time I pried open that jar, every time I counted out crumpled bills that should have gone to my own survival. But I silenced it with excuses. Family helps family, I told myself. Don't be cruel. Don't accuse without proof. Now, watching Franklin relax in his shiny SUV, those excuses crumbled. The mask I'd politely accepted for years was slipping, and behind it was not a family in need, but a family well practiced in the art of manipulation. The truth was painful, but undeniable. My doubts had been there all along. I had just chosen not to believe them, and that choice had cost me more than money. It had cost me my peace. Franklin lingered by the SUV, phone pressed to his ear, his head tilting side to side as though searching for something, or someone. Every few seconds, his gaze swept the parking lot, sharp and deliberate. Not a man distracted, but a man making. Sure no one was watching, I pressed myself tighter against the wall, breath shallow. Why so cautious if you had nothing to hide? Why scan the lot as if the truth might be peeking around the corner? He laughed suddenly, loud enough for the sound to carry across the rows of cars. It wasn't the laugh of a man crushed under bills. It was easy, loose, the laugh of someone who has money to spare and knows it. I felt a sting deep in my chest. Then voices floated toward me, breaking my trance. Two women, about my age, pushing carts piled with groceries. They were chatting as they passed just a few feet from my hiding place. not even noticing me in the shadows. "Did you see Marissa last weekend?" the first asked, her voice laced with envy. "That dress she wore at the banquet, it must have cost at least $200. I saw one just like it at that boutique on Euclid Avenue," the other woman scoffed. "And her hair. My niece works at that salon downtown, the one where they charge more for highlights than I spend on a month's rent. Guess who's a regular?" "Marissa Price." My stomach tightened. They kept walking, cart squeaking, voices fading but still audible. "And don't get me started on that birthday party they threw for Franklin," the first woman added with a chuckle. "Caterers, balloons, a chocolate fountain. Looked like something out of a magazine." "Poor? Please, poor people don't rent DJs and serve champagne." Their laughter drifted away, but it left me colder than the shade around me. I clutched the edge of the railing, my knuckles white. Each word they spoke fit too neatly into Harold's warning, into the image I'd just seen with my own eyes. Expensive clothes, salons, parties, luxuries bought while I cut pills in half and Daniel dragged himself through extra shifts. I thought back to the jar again. All the times I'd pried it open for what I thought were desperate needs. Rent overdue. Medicine for Franklin. Groceries for Marissa's siblings. Every time I'd handed over money with the quiet pride of someone who still had something to give. And all the while, they were laughing behind closed doors, twirling in salon chairs, pouring wine at parties I wasn't invited to. The realization struck like a slap. I had been their fool. I'd been the invisible sponsor of their lifestyle, the silent benefactor who paid so they could play. The shame burned hotter than anger. I prided myself on being careful, wise, a woman who'd survived. Alone. Yet here I was, hiding behind a grocery store, realizing I'd been conned by smiles and tears and carefully timed stories. Franklin ended his call and leaned against the SUV with a smug ease, as though the world was safely tucked into his pocket. My heart pounded so loud I feared he might hear it from across the lot. I wanted to step out, to shout, to demand answers. But instead, I stayed hidden. Because now I knew. Harold was right. The neighbors were right. My gut was right. The mask had cracked, and the truth was uglier than I ever could have imagined. By the time I forced myself out from behind the loading dock, Franklin's SUV had disappeared into traffic. The parking lot looked ordinary again, mothers loading strollers, a teenager chasing a runaway cart, car doors slamming shut. Ordinary, except for the storm raging inside me. Daniel's car sat waiting 2 rows over, the engine idling. He waved when he saw me, his boyish grin unchanged since childhood. For a moment, I almost convinced myself to forget what I'd seen, to tuck the truth away like an unwanted receipt. But the image of Franklin's glossy bags and smug posture clung to me. I slid into the passenger seat. Daniel glanced at me, his brows furrowing. "You okay, Mom? You look pale." "Just the heat," I lied, smoothing the receipt in my pocket before shoving it deep into my purse. "Crowds make me tired." He nodded, buying it without question. That's who my son was, always trusting, never suspicious. It was part of what made him good, and part of what made him vulnerable. As we pulled out of the lot, I tried for small talk, the weather, the traffic, his job, anything to keep my voice steady. But Daniel, oblivious to the weight pressing on me, steered the conversation exactly where I dreaded. "Marissa's folks are having a rough time again," he said with a sigh. "Dad Price had to cut back his hours. Company trouble. That's why we've been covering some extra bills this month." The words scraped against my ears. Hours cut? Bills overdue? I pictured Franklin's polished shoes stepping out of the SUV. Daniel went on, his tone resigned. "They're proud people, Mom. They don't like asking, but what can they do? When emergencies pile up, you help family." I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to stay gentle. And you're sure it's emergencies? Not something else? He glanced at me briefly before turning back to the road. What do you mean? I shook my head quickly. Nothing. Just, sometimes I worry about you working so many shifts. You need rest, too. His grip on the steering wheel tightened. I'm fine. Besides, Marissa's great at finding deals. Half the stuff you see at their place? Clearance. Discounts. She's smart that way. Clearance. Discounts. Bargains. The same rehearsed script I'd heard from Marissa herself. Each excuse, neat, tidy, too perfect. I forced a smile. Of course. She does have a talent for stretching a dollar. Inside, my stomach churned. Daniel hummed under his breath as we drove through the quiet streets, as if repeating these explanations soothed him. Each word, though, felt like a dagger to me, because I knew what he didn't, that the bargains were lies, the discounts illusions, the emergencies staged like cheap theater, and yet I couldn't bring myself to say it. Not here, not now. I turned to look at him, my boy who once begged me to stay at his soccer games until the very end, who had shared peanut butter sandwiches with me when we couldn't afford dinner, who had grown into a man so kind that manipulators saw him as easy prey. He was driving us straight into the arms of people who would bleed him dry. I bit the inside of my cheek to keep the tears from showing. If he noticed, he said nothing, focused only on the road ahead, humming the way he always did when he believed everything was under control. It was the longest car ride of my life. When Daniel pulled into the driveway, my breath caught. The price. House sat on a tidy street in Shaker Heights, its two-story frame freshly painted in a shade of cream that gleamed under the afternoon sun. The lawn was trimmed to perfection, flower beds bursting with color. It didn't match the stories I'd been fed of overdue bills and desperate sacrifices. Looks good, doesn't it? Daniel said as he shifted the car into park. His voice carried a note of pride, as though his in-laws' home was an extension of his own success. I forced a nod. Very good. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lemon polish and roasted meat. My eyes swept the living room, and the changes hit me all at once. The sagging sofa I remembered had been replaced with buttery leather. The rickety coffee table was gone, replaced by glass that shimmered with newness. On the wall hung a television so large it looked like it belonged in a showroom, not the home of people pleading poverty. I stood frozen, pretending to adjust my purse while cataloging every detail. Marissa swept in from the kitchen, her smile wide, her arms outstretched. She wore a dress that fit like it had been tailored for her, the fabric rich and the cut sharp. Around her neck glinted a delicate chain that I doubted came from any clearance rack. "Mom Ellis," she said brightly, kissing my cheek. "You look wonderful. I'm so glad you're here." I murmured a thank you, my eyes scanning her appearance. The shoes, the handbag, even the faint scent of perfume. It all whispered money. Money they supposedly didn't have. We sat and she bustled around, setting glasses on coasters. "Daniel, open that bottle, will you?" she asked, nodding toward the sideboard. My son retrieved it and my heart sank. A deep red label I recognized from grocery trips of my own. The wine cost more than half my weekly groceries. "Got it on sale," Marissa chirped, as if reading my mind. "Can you believe it? 90% off. A friend at the shop said it. Aside for us." Her words flowed too easily, too practiced. The same tone she used whenever explaining away the unexplainable. From my seat, I could see into the kitchen. The refrigerator door swung open as Franklin returned from the backyard, arms loaded with bags. Inside, I glimpsed shelves lined with gourmet cheeses, imported sparkling water, vegetables so fresh they could have come from a farmer's market that morning. Not survival rations, luxuries. Marissa noticed me watching and gave a quick laugh. "Don't worry, Mom Ellis. We found a bulk discount at the co-op. Sometimes you just get lucky." Lucky, clearance, discounts. always the same words, the same shield against suspicion. I smiled politely, but inside my heart hardened. As the conversation drifted, I kept cataloging. The gleaming appliances in the kitchen, the expensive-looking rug under my feet, the crystal glasses on the table. Each detail was another stone added to the growing weight in my chest. I thought of my jar again. Coins and wrinkled bills sacrificed so Daniel's in-laws could pour wine into crystal. I wanted to scream. But instead, I nodded at the right moments, asked safe questions, and stored every detail in my mind like evidence in a case file. By the time dinner was set on the table, cuts of meat that cost more than my monthly medication, I knew one thing for certain. This was no family in crisis. It was a performance, and I was sitting in the front row. Dinner passed in a blur of polite conversation and forced smiles. My fork moved, but the food tasted like ash. Every laugh from Marissa, every casual remark from Franklin, felt rehearsed. Lines from a play they had performed too many times. When I finally slipped away to the bathroom, I closed the door, leaned against the sink, and pulled out my phone. A new message blinked across the screen. It was from Harold, the cashier. Mrs. Ellis, I shouldn't meddle, but I couldn't keep this to myself. Attached was a photo of a receipt. I zoomed in, my pulse pounding. The total was $427.89, imported meats, specialty cheeses. 2 bottles of French champagne, each priced higher than what I spent on groceries in a month. The name printed at the bottom was clear. Franklin Price. My hand shook as I scrolled. Harold had sent more. Snapshots of receipts from previous weeks. Each one bloated with luxuries. Seafood, fine wines, designer household goods. I pressed my fist against my mouth to stifle a cry. This wasn't an isolated indulgence. It was routine. When I rejoined the group, Franklin was outside, standing near the driveway. Through the window, I watched him chat with a neighbor who was washing his car. Their body language was casual, friendly. After a few minutes, Franklin reached into his wallet and pulled out a stack of bills. He handed them over as if peeling away scraps of paper, not hard-earned cash. The neighbor pocketed it gratefully, and Franklin clapped him on the shoulder before heading back inside. I stayed rooted in place, bile rising in my throat. This wasn't survival. This wasn't a family making do, barely scraping by, relying on Daniel's generosity to bridge the gaps. No, this was a system, a polished, well-rehearsed system designed to extract money with stories of hardship, while their real lives thrived, in secret comfort. Every clearance sale, every extra shift, every medical bill was another act in their performance. And Daniel, the boy who once saved his lunch money to buy me flowers on Mother's Day, was their audience, their sponsor, their victim. I thought of him then, sitting inside at the dining table, chatting easily with Marissa, his eyes soft with trust. He couldn't see what I saw. He didn't want to. I clenched my phone, the glowing receipt still open on the screen. Evidence, proof, enough to wake him if he would only look. But fear gnawed at me. Fear that even undeniable evidence might not be enough. Because lies, when whispered often enough, start to sound like truth. I turned away from the window, forcing my expression into something neutral, before Franklin returned. He breezed past me with a grin, smelling faintly of cologne and satisfaction, as if money grew wild in his pockets. Inside, the conversation flowed easily again. Marissa told Daniel about a great deal she'd found on a set of cookware. Franklin joked about his rough week at the office. Each word made my skin prickle. I smiled when expected. I nodded when spoken to. All the while, my mind repeated, the same phrase like a drumbeat. This is no accident. It's a system. And if I didn't find a way to stop it, they would bleed my son dry. Later that evening, when the plates were cleared and the polite laughter had thinned, Daniel offered to drive me home. I was grateful for the excuse to leave the performance behind. The ride was quiet at first, the hum of the tires filling the silence. Streetlights flickered across Daniel's face, softening the fatigue I knew too well. His jaw worked slightly, as if he were chewing on thoughts he couldn't quite voice. I decided to risk it. "Son," I began gently, "have you ever actually seen the bills? Or receipts? From Marissa's family, I mean. For the emergencies?" He glanced at me, puzzled. "Receipts? Yes, hospital paperwork, utility shut-off notices, anything like that. Proof of what they say they need." His brow furrowed. "Mom, what kind of question is that? Of course I haven't asked for proof. They're family." I shifted in my seat, keeping my voice calm. "I'm not saying you shouldn't trust them. I'm only asking if you've ever checked. Sometimes people exaggerate without meaning to. Sometimes marriage is trust, Mom." His voice was sharp now, defensive. "If Marissa tells me her dad needs medicine or her mom can't pay rent, I believe her. That's what a husband does." The words pierced me deeper than I expected. I stared out the window, blinking back the sting in my eyes. "I know," I whispered, "and I admire that about you. You've always been generous, but generosity can be dangerous if someone takes advantage." He exhaled hard through his nose. "Why are you even saying this? Did something happen today? You've been off since the store." My fingers knotted in my lap. The urge to pull out Harold's photos, to thrust the receipts into his hands, clawed at me. "Show him now," my gut screamed, "before it's too late." But another part of me knew, if I pressed too hard, he'd shut me out. He loved Marissa. He had tied his identity to protecting her, to providing for her family. To attack them outright was to attack him. So I forced a smile that tasted like ash. "Nothing happened. I'm just being a mother, worrying too much as usual." He relaxed slightly, though his hands still gripped the wheel tighter than before. "You've got to trust me on this. Marissa wouldn't lie. Her family's been through enough already. I'm not about to start interrogating them over receipts." The finality in his tone told me the conversation was over. I looked at him then. My boy, grown into a man with calloused hands and tired eyes, still carrying the same trusting heart he'd had since childhood. I remembered him at 12, handing me wildflowers he'd picked from the vacant lot down the street, insisting they were better than any florist's bouquet. That same innocence shone through even now, and it broke me. Because I could see the strings, the manipulation, the rehearsed excuses. I could see the system tightening around him, feeding on his kindness. And he could not. So I swallowed the truth for now. I told myself I needed more evidence, more than even his loyal heart could deny. Something so clear, so undeniable that no excuse or bargain sale story could wash it away. Until then, I would wait, watch, collect. I turned my eyes back to the window, my reflection faint in the glass. Daniel hummed softly beside me, as if the world were safe. But I knew better. It was a Wednesday evening when the phone rang. Daniel's voice was weary, his words clipped with stress. "Mom, Marissa just called me from her parents' place. It's urgent. Her dad needs minor surgery and insurance won't cover everything. They need $200 by Friday." His tone carried no hesitation, just resignation, as though requests like these were as normal as the weather. I clutched the receiver tighter. "Surgery? What kind of surgery?" "They said it's a heart procedure. Nothing too serious, but still expensive. Mom, I'll probably have to pick up overtime again." My stomach twisted. I could picture Franklin reclining in his spotless SUV, champagne on the seat beside him. The memory made me sick. After Daniel hung up, I sat in silence, tea cooling at my elbow. Then my phone buzzed with a new message. Harold again. Mrs. Ellis, I thought you should see this. I opened the photo and my breath caught. Another receipt. Date stamped that very afternoon. Total, $612.74. Champagne, 2 bottles, each over $100. Imported seafood, gourmet cheeses, luxury items stacked like a feast. Franklin's name gleamed in black ink at the bottom. The very same day, they begged for surgery money. My hands trembled as I saved the image. I didn't know whether to weep or scream. Instead, I called Daniel. Son, I need you to come over tonight, I said, trying to steady my voice. It's important. When he arrived, I made him tea, setting the cup in front of him the way I had since he was a boy. He looked so tired, shoulders slumped under burdens he shouldn't have carried. What's wrong, Mom? He asked. I slid my phone across the table. Look, he frowned, thumb swiping the screen. His eyes scanned the numbers, then darted to the date. His jaw tightened. This has to be a mistake, he muttered. Maybe it's someone else with the same name. I shook my head. No, it's Franklin. The cashier, Harold, sent it to me. He's seen them shopping like this before. Daniel's face flushed. Mom, you can't just trust some cashier's gossip. Daniel, I cut in gently. Look at the total. Look at the items. Champagne, seafood. The same day they told you Franklin needed surgery money. Does that sound like a man too broke to cover medical costs? His lips parted, but no words came. He set the phone down as though it burned. I don't want to believe this, he whispered. Marissa, her family, they would, I said softly. And they are. He leaned back, raking a hand through his hair. His defenses faltered, the first cracks spreading across the wall he had built around his marriage. But why? He asked hoarsely. Why would they lie to me? To us? Because it works, I answered. Because you're good. Because you believe them. They've turned your kindness into their income. Daniel's eyes glistened. He looked younger, in that moment, vulnerable in a way I hadn't seen since he was a child. The silence stretched between us, broken only by the hum of the fridge. Then he whispered, I need to know the truth, all of it. I reached across the table, covering his hand with mine. Then let's get it, son. But this time with proof they can't explain away. His nod was slow, heavy. The denial hadn't fully shattered yet, but I could see it crumbling. The system was unraveling, and Daniel was finally starting to see the threads. Daniel didn't wait long. That very night, after leaving my apartment, he drove straight home. He told me later that his hands were shaking on the steering wheel the entire way, his mind looping between denial and dread. When he walked through the door, Marissa greeted him with her usual sweet smile. You're late, she said lightly, kissing his cheek. Dinner's in the oven. But Daniel wasn't listening. His eyes roamed the room with new clarity. The expensive rug, the new curtains, the faint scent of perfume lingering in the signs he had once overlooked now screamed for attention. While Marissa busied herself in the kitchen, he slipped into their bedroom. At first, he saw nothing unusual. Then he opened the closet. Shopping bags, dozens of them, stuffed behind. Coats. Designer names flashed back at him in glossy print. Inside one bag, he found a silk blouse still with its price tag, $289. Another bag held shoes worth more than his monthly car payment. His chest tightened. He moved to her vanity and pulled open the drawers. Jewelry boxes stacked neatly inside. Most pieces untouched. Rings, bracelets, a gold watch. All hidden from sight, all far too expensive for the story of barely scraping by. Finally, on the top shelf, he found a spiral notebook. He pulled it down and flipped it open. Page after page, written in Marissa's looping handwriting, cataloged the money she had asked for. Each entry had a date, an emergency listed, and the amount received. Rent, medical bills, broken car. Franklin's prescriptions. The notebook wasn't just a record. It was a playbook. And worse, at the back, future scenarios were planned out. A dental surgery, a stolen wallet, even a potential house repair. Daniel's stomach churned. He confronted her, notebook in hand. Marissa's face paled. Daniel, it's not what it looks like. He cut her off. It looks like a system. Lies. Manipulation. Using me. Using my mother. Her voice rose, defensive. You went through my things? That's the real betrayal? Not trusting your wife? Not trusting my wife? Daniel snapped, slamming the Yusar notebook on the dresser. How about my wife lying to me for years, treating me like an ATM? Do you think I'm blind? Do you think I don't see the shopping bags, the jewelry, the receipts? Her eyes flickered with panic. The argument drew Franklin from the living room. He stepped into the doorway, his face a mask of false calm. Daniel, you're overreacting. Families help each other. Always have. Always will. Daniel's hands trembled as he held up the notebook. This isn't help. This is theft. You've been planning emergencies like they were business transactions. Was I just your investment? Your reliable payout every month? For a long moment, Franklin said nothing. Then, with a sigh, he dropped the act. His eyes hardened, his mouth twisting into something cold. You were easy, he admitted. Generous. Soft-hearted. We knew you'd never question Marissa. Why wouldn't we take advantage? That's what family's for. The words sliced through Daniel like glass. Marissa reached for his arm, desperate now. Daniel, please listen. He doesn't mean that. We love you. I love you. But her voice wavered, and Daniel saw through it. For the first time, he saw not a wife, but a skilled manipulator caught in her own trap. He pulled away. No. Love doesn't look like this. Love doesn't keep notebooks of lies. That night, he slept at a motel. By morning, he called me, his voice raw but resolute. It's over, Mom. The marriage, the lies, all of it. They saw me as an income stream. Nothing more. I can't go back. My heart ached, but beneath the pain was relief. The truth was, out. The marriage had broken, but so had the chain of manipulation. The days that followed were heavy with silence. Daniel filed for divorce within a week, his face pale, but his voice steady. Papers were signed, lawyers exchanged sharp words, and in the end, the marriage that once looked so full of promise dissolved into a stack of documents and bitter truths. For months, he lived out of a small apartment near his job. The space was modest, bare walls, secondhand furniture, no television. But it was his. For the first time in years, his paycheck was his own. He no longer came home to tearful demands or last-minute emergencies. And though loneliness sometimes pressed against him, he began to breathe easier. Healing wasn't instant. There were nights he called me, his voice cracking, asking how he could have been so blind. I reminded him that trust isn't weakness, it's a gift. The fault was not in his giving heart, but in those who exploited it. Slowly, he began to believe me. Time did what time always does. It softened the sharp edges of grief. Daniel rebuilt himself piece by piece. He saved money. He laughed again. And one spring afternoon, nearly 2 years after the divorce, he introduced me to someone new. Her name was Claire. She wasn't flashy or rehearsed. She worked at his office, carried her own burdens with quiet strength, and treated Daniel with the respect he had always deserved. When she came to dinner at my apartment, she brought the ingredients for a casserole and cooked beside me in my tiny kitchen, humming as she chopped vegetables. Mrs. Ellis, she said shyly as we set the table, I want you to know I'll never ask Daniel for a penny that isn't mine to share. I value honesty too much. Her words brought tears to my eyes. For the first time in years, I believed my son had found someone who saw him. Not his wallet, not his kindness to be exploited, but him. The day they married, there were no extravagant parties, no champagne fountains, just a small gathering of friends and family in a community hall with simple flowers and genuine laughter. When Daniel looked at Claire, I saw no trace of the weary, manipulated man I'd once worried would break under the weight of lies. I saw a man reborn. As for me, I learned my own lesson. For years I thought keeping the peace meant staying silent, that biting my tongue was a form of love. But silence can be dangerous. Silence can enable lies. What saved Daniel wasn't confrontation or revenge. It was quiet, undeniable truth. The receipts, the observations, the evidence carefully gathered until the story could no longer hold. I didn't need to scream at Franklin or humiliate Marissa in front of neighbors. I didn't need to destroy them. The facts destroyed themselves. Silent. Dignity exposes louder than revenge, and generosity, I've learned, must live with boundaries. Giving without limit isn't kindness, it's surrender. Now, when I sit in my armchair with a cup of tea cooling in my hand, I sometimes think back to the day in the grocery store when Harold leaned across the counter and whispered words that shattered my illusions. If I had ignored him, if I had chosen comfort over truth, Daniel might still be trapped in that cycle, working himself into the ground for people who laughed at his sacrifice. Instead, we both found freedom. And freedom, I've discovered, is worth far more than money. Looking back now, I realize the most dangerous part of it all wasn't the lies themselves. It was the silence I kept while those lies grew. For years, I ignored the red flags, the sudden emergencies, the too perfect excuses, the little signs that didn't add up. I told myself I was protecting my son's happiness by staying quiet. But silence doesn't protect. Silence enables. It took courage to face the truth, and even more courage to expose it. Not with shouting or revenge, but with quiet persistence. With proof that couldn't be denied. And in the end, that truth freed us. My son lost a marriage, yes, but he gained his dignity, his peace, and a future built on honesty instead of manipulation. The lesson? Generosity is powerful, but without boundaries it becomes a weapon for others to use against us. Trust is beautiful, but it must be tested. And sometimes, the greatest act of love is daring to confront uncomfortable truths before they destroy the people we care about most. So I want to ask you, have you ever ignored red flags in your own life? Overlooked inconsistencies because it was easier to believe the story than to face the truth? Maybe it was in a friendship, a relationship, or even within your own family. If so, let my story be a reminder. Sometimes silence is the real danger. And sometimes the quiet act of gathering courage and speaking up can change everything. If this story resonated with you, if you want more true stories of hidden truths and real justice, make sure you subscribe and join us for the next chapter. Because in every family, in every community, there are secrets waiting to be uncovered. And sometimes the truth is closer than you think.